a lethal military campaign against drug smugglers in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
It's really rocking the bedrock of America's closest alliances and raising the stakes in the war on drugs to, frankly, dangerous new heights. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
So our sources today, they lay out this story of, well, rapid, almost unprecedented military escalation. And there's a steep price tag that comes with it, measured in, shattered alliances. Since early September 2025, the U.S. military has carried out at least 19 lethal strikes.
19, yeah.
On vessels suspected of drug smuggling. This is across the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. The result, at least 76 deaths.
76 alleged traffickers eliminated in, barely 2 months?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of action is the direct result of a really fundamental shift in U.S. doctrine. The Trump administration legally reclassified these drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs,
FTOs.
and declared the conflict a non-international armed conflict, a NIE. This reclassification basically switches the whole legal framework. You go from crime fighting to actual warfare. And that shift, that pivot from policing to these kinetic military strikes. That's really the core of our deep dive today. The administration is prioritizing what it sees as decisive action against narco-terrorism. They argue it's a necessary defense of the homeland.
Sure, that's the argument.
But this aggressive move, which is pretty unilateral, it's forced 3 of our most critical partners, we're talking the UK, Canada, and Colombia, to just abruptly halt crucial intelligence sharing.
It's really a stunning rupture, in global security cooperation. So today we're going to try and walk you through what the U.S. is actually doing and the 3-pronged legal architecture they've set up to justify it.
Okay.
And maybe most importantly, we'll detail why our closest allies are, terrified of legal complicity, essentially choosing to walk away, even when it means sacrificing, key operational effectiveness.
Okay, let's start with just the sheer scale of this change. Operationally, for decades, U.S. counter-narcotics efforts, they were mostly law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
Led by the Coast Guard.
Yeah, standard stuff. Slow, deliberate process, visit, board search, and seizure VBSS. The focus was always detention and prosecution.
Right.
But what's really fascinating here is the speed. The speed with which the Pentagon just kind of substituted that non-lethal interdiction model with this new phrase, elimination over interdiction.
Elimination over interdiction. Wow.
That's a full-spectrum military approach now,
Right.
defined by direct kinetic action. And it's massively expanded the scope, too. We're not just talking the Caribbean anymore, but deep into the Eastern Pacific. That's a corridor responsible for moving, roughly 74% of the cocaine entering the U.S.
74%. So yeah, this is literally moving from policing a crime scene to prosecuting a war zone.
Exactly, prosecuting a war. And to legitimize these wartime rules, the administration built this powerful sort of 3-part legal defense. The first part, as you mentioned, is redefining the threat itself, labeling the cartels FTOs, declaring this formal non-international armed conflict.
Okay, so that's prong 1.
And this is the core legal move. It changes everything because once an NIAC is declared, you get to invoke the Law of Armed Conflict, LOAC.
LOAC, right.
And under LOAC, these alleged traffickers, they transform from criminals into unlawful combatants. Now, critically, this means they can be targeted, engaged with lethal force, even if they aren't presenting an immediate threat to life at that exact moment. That standard is completely different from what police or, Coast Guard officers usually operate under.
Totally different rules of engagement. And the administration also provided some kind of internal legal shield for the personnel carrying out these strikes. Our sources confirm the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel, the OLC, reportedly drafted a classified legal opinion. What did that say?
It apparently asserted that U.S. military personnel involved in these kinetic strikes are immune from criminal prosecution. It clearly demonstrates the administration's internal commitment here, right? They aren't just changing the rules of engagement on the ground. They are legally insulating the people who have to execute the policy.
That degree of legal backing, it must open up possibilities beyond just stopping drugs, surely. Is there a consensus among analysts that maybe this posture serves a larger strategic goal?
Oh, absolutely. Many suggest this strong military stance has a dominant secondary objective, and it's purely geopolitical.
Okay.
Applying acute military and perhaps economic pressure on the Venezuelan regime, Nicolas Maduro's regime. If the U.S. can essentially establish a military theater in the region justified by fighting FTOs, well, it increases its leverage substantially against what it sees as hostile state actors nearby.
Right. Okay, so We see this decisive, legally backed American action, but this is precisely where the international cost really kicks in, creating what our sources are calling a rare rupture, right in the heart of the Five Eyes intelligence partnership.
Yeah, Five Eyes, US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
Tell us about the UK's reaction. They were first, right?
The UK acted first, yeah. They suspended intelligence sharing with the US specifically regarding suspected drug vessels. And this pause, it actually began more than a month before the November reporting came out.
Wow, so it wasn't immediate news.
No. And look, this isn't about, solidarity with traffickers or anything like that. It's about existential legal risk for British officials and personnel.
What exactly is that fear? Is it just a sort of theoretical disagreement over law?
And no, it's much more tangible. It's legal jeopardy focusing on the principle of complicity. The UK's intelligence, right? Data traditionally provided for non-lethal law enforcement type interdiction.
The old VBSS model.
Exactly. Could now be repurposed as target acquisition data for lethal military strikes. And if that happens, British officials worry they could be established as legally complicit in what they, and frankly, much of the world view as unlawful killings under international law.
And that liability, it could go right down to individual service members. Sources mention a senior Royal Navy officer on the USS Winston Churchill.
That's right. That specific officer, who's embedded with the U.S. Naval Strike Force, could potentially face personal criminal liability. Maybe in the UK, maybe elsewhere, for complicity, if that ship participates in operations deemed illegal by, international norms or UK law. It forces the UK government to a terrible choice: protect a key alliance or protect its own people from legal danger.
And it wasn't just the UK. The defections, they spread pretty quickly after that. Canada distanced itself, made it clear its intel shouldn't be used for lethal attacks. But maybe the biggest operational blow came from Colombia, usually seen as our anchor partner down there.
That was Colombia, yeah. They suspended cooperation entirely, cited human rights concerns linked to these kinetic strikes. Operationally, it's catastrophic, because Colombia provides something like over 80% of the U.S.'s actionable intelligence on drug movements in the region.
80%. Just think about what losing 80% of your real-time intelligence actually means on the ground.
Well, it doesn't just mean fewer successful interdictions, though it certainly means that. It means huge new blind spots. It means the U.S. military, even with this, new kinetic approach, is essentially flying blind 4 times out of 5, maybe more.
Wow.
So the ability of JITF South, the Joint Interagency Task Force South down in Florida, its ability to detect, track, and intercept is severely degraded. You can have the best hardware, the best ships, the best planes, but without that human intelligence network, especially the part provided by allies like Colombia, the whole system just grinds down.
So the immediate kinetic success came at the cost of that long-term operational awareness.
Precisely.
Okay, so if the operational fallout is that high, let's drill down into the core legal argument. The schism that caused this rupture, it really boils down to a fundamental disagreement. Is this war or is this policing? LOAC versus International Human Rights Law, IHRL.
That's the entire argument, isn't it? The UK, the broader international consensus, including people like the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, they assert that drug enforcement is strictly a law enforcement matter, governed by IHRL.
Right.
And under those rules, which are designed for police forces, lethal force is only permissible as an absolute last resort against an imminent threat to life.
So if a suspected drug boat is just, running away across the water, IHRL says you can't use lethal force unless they are actively, right then and there, endangering someone's life.
Exactly. So the UN explicitly views these U.S. strikes, where vessels are often targeted without, immediately threatening U.S. personnel. They view them as extrajudicial killings under that IHRL standard.
But the U.S. administration just rejects that framework entirely.
Completely rejects it, argues it's operating under LOAC, wartime rules, and they're dealing with enemy combatants, period.
And we saw that public pushback from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. It really encapsulated this unilateral stance, didn't it? He said, I don't think that the European Union gets to determine what international law is.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement. It basically says the administration views its own national security prerogatives as superseding the legal objections coming from partners.
Now, despite that strong stance internationally, the domestic side hasn't exactly been quiet, has it? Even U.S. lawmakers, including Republicans, started demanding answers, transparency.
That's right. bipartisan letters started flying.
What were they asking for?
They wanted clarification on the specific legal authority for the strikes, and they asked whether the administration planned to seek a formal authorization for the use of military force, an AUMF, from Congress, the constitutional process.
Right, but they also pointed out what seems like a massive contradiction in how the administration itself was behaving.
Yeah, the contradiction, it centers on how they treated the people they captured, the survivors. If these individuals are genuinely unlawful combatants who warrant lethal engagement under LOAC, well, then they should be detained and probably prosecuted under wartime rules, right? Like prisoners of war, essentially.
Okay, makes sense.
Yet, these lawmakers pointed out that survivors of at least one strike were simply repatriated, sent back to their home country.
Repatriated, but that's what you do with, detained criminals or maybe migrants. It's not what you do with enemy combatants captured in an armed conflict.
Exactly. It seems to suggest the administration wants the legal protection of LOAC, mainly the right to use lethal force more freely without taking on the corresponding legal obligations, like the requirement to detain and prosecute these individuals as enemy combatants.
That inconsistency, it really undermines their whole legal argument, doesn't it?
Severely undermines it. Because if they aren't enemies when they're captured alive, then arguably they weren't enemies when they were being targeted moments before, which brings you right back to that higher standard of imminent threat to life under IHRL.
And this internal conflict, it wasn't just Congress. There were reports of significant skepticism within the U.S. military command structure itself.
That might be the most telling signal, actually. The internal friction over the doctrine and the legality. Admiral Alvin Halsey, commander of U.S. Southern Command, Southcom, he reportedly offered to resign over his concerns about the legality of these strikes.
Offered to resign.
Yes. And the fact that he's now scheduled to step down just 1 year into his tenure.
Well, it speaks volumes about the level of discomfort this aggressive unilateral policy has created, even at the highest levels of the U.S. defense community.
So ultimately, what we're seeing here is a kind of strategic trade-off, isn't it? The U.S. achieved immediate, decisive kinetic results. 19 strikes, 76 killed, pursuing immediate deterrence.
Yeah, clear results in that narrow sense. But it did so by severely degrading those multinational efforts back at JIETF South and really fracturing the fundamental trust with its closest partners over these kind of irreconcilable legal differences.
That's the trade-off. The administration seems to be doubling down on this high deterrent military-first model, the argument being that, decades of the policing model failed to stop the drug crisis. But the cost is stark. The loss of actionable, potentially life-saving intelligence from key allies like Colombia and the UK.
So, to sum it up for you listening, the U.S. has effectively, unilaterally redefined the rules of engagement, maybe even the rules of war, to combat drug cartels. It's transformed what was largely a policing issue into a kinetic military conflict. The immediate result, tactical success. But it created a profound legal split that forced its closest intelligence allies, the UK, Canada, Colombia, to basically abandon operational partnership because they fear being complicit in illegal acts.
Right. The immediate threat gets addressed with firepower, sure. But the sustained intelligence gathering effort, the thing you need for long-term success, that's been crippled. Which leaves us with a really critical question, I think. If the U.S. continues down this path, prioritizing the elimination of narco-terrorists under this unilateral military legal framework, will the long-term erosion of trust, especially within the Five Eyes partnership, and the loss of, say, 80% of actionable intelligence from partners like Colombia, will that ultimately make the U.S. less secure than the drug interdiction model it abandoned?
A difficult question.
Because the cost of those lost eyes and ears on the ground, that might ultimately be far higher than the 76 lives eliminated in these strikes.
It's a vital question indeed, especially for anyone tracking how counter-narcotics policy seems to be rapidly transforming into military doctrine right before our eyes.